counterfactuals, information, creativity, wealth generation. I want to draw an arch between the theory of information as presented by Chiara Marletto in The Science of Can and Can't, where she talks about counterfactuals and she defines information within the context of counterfactuals, and the concept of wealth generation through iteration. And the key point here is the way we see wealth generation, at least from our perspective. It is the kind of iteration that allows for the build out of an innovation stack. And I think there's a fine line that any kind of situation has to have, or company or entrepreneur, where you have to have this counterfactual property of being either there or here, and you have therefore to have sort of a lot of information. You have to contain a lot of information, or in other words, you have to have a lot of counterfactuals, or you have to have the potential for creativity, which is embedded in the counterfactuals. You have to have that, but you also need to have a certain pathway to building an innovation stack. And this is sort of the realm in which we live at Orange Capital Partners and the way we think we can generate wealth. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's August 12, 2021. This is Crim Telco. For today, the fund's up 1.2%. The market is up 20 basis points. We are up 10.9% for the year. The market's up 19.1%. We're underperforming by 9.2%. Chiara Marletto's Science of Can and Can't. It's a book that I've discussed several times in this podcast. I want to jump right into it here and talk about her assessment, or her definition, or her conversation about what she considers information. And she talks about the ability to carry counterfactuals. In other words, any physical system where the laws of physics allow for counterfactuals carries information. This is, in a nutshell, how Chiara sees the definition of information. What does that mean? You have a lamp, it can be on and off. That is information. And she also adds a few more things, such as, for example, it has to be able to be copied, otherwise it's lost and therefore kind of ephemeral. But let's not go too deep into that, because I really want to stay within the realm of the hedge fund business and the wealth generation business. So, because I think there's a very nice arch to be drawn. Or in other words, the question that we have at Orange Capital Partners, it's a fundamental question, which is, okay, we want to invest in companies that have fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices which carry them towards having a large impact on society, on business. This is the goal. The result is wealth generation, high returns, and success. We think that fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, of course, within that, the concept itself embeds information. You cannot have a fundamentally new concept without information. The question, though, is what kind of information, and in particular, also, what kind of fundamentally new concepts and engineering practice do you have to have, or do you require to be able to build an innovation stack? Because you need the innovation stack. In other words, disruption is built through continuous iteration. Iteration is defined by a process where the cost of iteration is lower. You cannot have iteration where cost of iteration is high by simply, if you use physics terms, if you need too much energy or too much resources to iterate, it is not going to happen. So let's say, for example, if you want to have a new planetary system around the Earth, and you want to iterate, let's say you want to build another moon and then a third moon and put it in different orbits and see what happens and iterate, it would take many times the resources of the Earth to build a moon. It's completely impossible to iterate, so therefore it ain't gonna happen. If you want to build an electric car, you need to iterate around batteries, lithium-ion batteries, then you need to iterate around design, you need to iterate around software, self-drive software. Those are the kinds of things that, in particular, Tesla is able to iterate at a relatively low cost, and therefore we believe that they can build an innovation stack around electric self-driving cars and succeed in the marketplace, because once that innovation stack is built out, they will have the advantage of 10x better, 10x cheaper, which we believe will propel them into success. So what does it take? What kind of information is necessary to succeed in the business of building out an innovation stack, or in the business of generating new concepts, fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices? And I want to use something that Chiara Marletto is mentioning in her book in chapter 4, or I think it's chapter 3. And the interesting thing here is she kind of uses a reductionist approach. So let's say instead of asking, okay, what does Tesla need to succeed? How about we go the other way around? Let's assume Tesla is a success, and now let's start to reduce all the factors that drive it to success. Let's see how many factors can we have, can we deduct from Tesla until we get to a point where we have to say, no, this way they can't succeed. So for example, let's assume we have a factor which is they have a superior approach towards software development in the self-drive space. We take that away. So they don't have that. They are just average. Let's say we take away their ability to produce efficient batteries. Let's say we take away their ability to attract the best talent, and so on and so forth. I think if we did it that way, we would all of a sudden find out that until we get to the point where Tesla is kind of forced into mediocrity, or is equivalent to other companies in the car space or in the software space, we have a lot of factors to subtract. And the more factors we have to subtract, or the more factors we can subtract until we get to sort of, let's say, a ground level, or a ground level of energy, or a ground level of, okay, this is a company, once we subtract all this, there's nothing left, so it's fungible with other companies. The more we have, the better, because the more of these factors there are, the more potential there is, the more information is embedded in Tesla, the more creativity, the more outcomes there are, and the more outcomes there are, the more potential. And this is also, let's say, if you use real options approach, the higher priced you will have the stock, and the higher priced it will be, or the more desirable it will be to work for Tesla, etc. So there's also, of course, the flywheel effect. You can do the same thing, let's say, with Amazon. You can do it with Google. And I think if you did that reductionist approach, I think the one thing you would learn very quickly is that certain companies, let's say Tesla, has a lot of these factors, and that other companies, I would say Google, for example, probably don't have that many. There's a few things which are crucial, and that's what keeps them sort of alive. That's what keeps them over water. But it's not that many. I would say Google is a good example. I would say Amazon is probably in the middle. Apple is somewhere there. So Microsoft, there are lots and lots of companies, very successful companies, Shopify, Zoom, where you probably don't have that many factors. And that is an interesting observation just in itself, just without any other conversation, without any other thought. We just look at this reductionist approach. We start saying, okay, how much can we reduce from company X until company X becomes average? And the more we reduce, the better and the higher the valuation should be. I think this is a good way to look at things, and also a good way, I think, to look at the potential, what we call potential within the space of investing. It's just another way to define what that potential is. So the more of these factors are, the more potential there is, the higher the valuation, and the more outcomes there are possible. The more information is embedded, the more information is in the company. Now, why does that matter? Why do we care about having information embedded in the company? Well, there's a couple of things to say here. For example, we want to make sure that a company has a lot of information or a lot of counterfactuals, because the more counterfactuals there are, the more outcomes the more outcomes we can see. The more outcomes we can see, the more we could potentially have successful engineering practices, products and services, money-making opportunities. This is the connection. So between the counterfactual, we go from the counterfactual to a product and service to sales. And this is in a nutshell the way we see this concept of counterfactuals and the concept of having more potential in a company. In other words, just means also having the ability to generate more sales out of assets, out of knowledge, out of information, out of counterfactuals within a company. So to summarize, we believe that if we look at companies in general, just we look at any kind of company and we try to find the interesting companies, the companies that interest us, we have to find a way to discern between counterfactuals, information, potential, and the build out of the innovation stack. Like for example, in our CRISPR portfolio, we have companies that differentiate themselves very clearly from, let's say, traditional pharmaceutical companies through the fact that they have the potential of building out an innovation stack around fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. The other side of this coin would be the traditional pharma, where you have lots of wealth generation there too. There's no question. But it's much more bespoke. It's much more random. So yes, there is, you see, this is the key point here that I'm trying to make. There is a lot of information in a traditional pharma company, because you could come out with this lucky strike and come up with a billion-dollar product, a blockbuster, or in the Hollywood, the traditional Hollywood business. But in the businesses that we invest in, we want to have counterfactuals and we want to have the build-out of the innovation stack. So this is how do we cross those two lines? This is the fundamental question that we ask ourselves at Orange Capital Partners every day. We don't want the bespoke, the lucky strike. We want to have as many counterfactuals as possible. In other words, as much information, as much potential for creativity as possible. But we want to have it in the context of building out an innovation stack. So what does it take? What's the difference between a bespoke pharmaceutical company and a CRISPR company? Well, on the one hand, we have a technology that is very simple to use. So a technique, which is the CRISPR technique, which allows for genome editing, which allows for fast try and error, low-cost try and error. So this is very important. The traditional pharma company did not have that. Digitization of life science means that we can put the counterfactuals, the many counterfactuals of biology, or in other words, the big chunk of information that biology embeds, we can put it in a digital space and then iterate through algorithms. What is an algorithm? An algorithm is just another way to sort through the data and find efficient ways, optimize, things like that. We can't do that without digitizing life sciences. So we need to be able to digitize life science, which we can do through the technique of CRISPR. Once we have that technique at hand, we then have the ability to use algorithms, which is, again, just another way to very quickly sort through the data and find optimal, whatever optimization we are looking for, we can find. So in the end, if we look at the companies that we invest, and I'm sorry, I'm making this conclusion on the fly. This is not scripted. This is literally me thinking while I'm talking. That's why I'm pausing a little bit more. But I think I'm getting to something here, which is the one line throughout all of our portfolio is that we are investing in information companies, companies that work with counterfactuals that are algorithmatizable. So we can then use computation to sort through data fast and more efficient to optimize things. This is in general what we're looking for. So a company needs to have the ability to use computation in a way to produce products and services. This is really, in a nutshell, what we can do with what we're looking for. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. But the key is that we have a technique which allows us to digitize the space that we're looking at, so we can use algorithms to quickly sort through data and find optimal points. This is, in a nutshell, what we're looking for. This is the key to our success. This is what we're looking for at Orange Capital Partners. This is the way we try to embrace the concept of fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices within the context of wealth generation. Thank you.